Okay, you're okay? Yeah, for sure. I'll just make sure that. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think we'll begin where we have, we're here in the Woodside Building for Technology and Design at the Monash University Clayton campus, and we also have, so we have people live, which is fantastically joining us in person, and we also have, we're streaming online as well, so we have welcome to those people. So I'd like to begin by asking you to acknowledge with me the people of the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung tribes of the Kulin Nations, who are the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we're here today. I'd like to acknowledge that their sovereignty was never ceded. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. And also I'd like to acknowledge any Indigenous persons, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander persons with us today also. So I'm going to begin with a few words of introductions about why we're here today, and then I'll MC the proceedings. So we're here today to launch the Humanized Lab, which is the creation of Professor John Grundy. He's a professor here in the Faculty of IT at Monash and is also our Laureate Fellow. So you'll hear more about that shortly. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Faculty of IT. We're unique in the group of 8 here in Australia of having a standalone Faculty of IT. We were established more than 30 years ago, and we've survived the idiosyncrasies of university restructures, and we've gone from strength to strength. So we have a breadth of expertise that is unmatched in the Australian environment at least, and I also think quite unusual even in world terms. And we also, across that spectrum of the technical, computer science, software engineering, which is John's area, data science and AI, through to information systems, digital archiving and record keeping, the creative people that work with the design people. We have a breadth of expertise and interest that brings us together and gives us the opportunities to do truly impactful interdisciplinary work in a way that I think places us very well. So our mission is IT for social good, and that's well aligned with the Monash strategy, Impact 2030, and I think that you'll hear in some of the projects that John will talk about later that focus on impact and that focus on social good. So the faculty's been going more than 30 years, but in the last 5 years we've had a resurgence and a growth. So that's when we attracted John to join us. So from 2018-19, the faculty recruited nearly a dozen world-class software engineering academics, including John. He came in, he took on the role of Senior Deputy Dean for the Faculty of IT, but he took that leadership in software engineering, built up a very strong team with those other academics that we recruited, and then brought together much of what he'd already been doing, expanded it in that environment, and of course was successful in obtaining a laureate. So as many of you will know, these Laureate Fellowships are very hard to get. They're very prestigious, and they are given for a combination of absolutely stellar world-class researchers who've built up a really strong track record in their discipline, but who also put forward a really compelling vision, narrative and vision about what they might do if they were to be given a laureate with the associated funding and opportunities. So John did that, and you'll hear more about that. Was awarded in 2019 and started in early 2020. Well, what a challenging time to start your laureate. So the Humanized Lab that John put together in those early stages of his laureate, which we're here to launch today, has actually kind of been up and running for a while, but we haven't been able to come together and celebrate John's laureate and to launch the lab in person because of course, the pandemic. So it's wonderful that we're actually here, many of us here today in person, and also people joining online to do that celebration. So John's lab, which he'll be telling you more about with his project, has focuses around human-centred software engineering, and that's that interdisciplinary aspect that I mentioned before. There's significant industry and community involvement, and of course the focus is on impact. We have nearly 20 PhDs working with that, in John's lab, which is separate from our main software engineering group. Even in just John's lab with 2 academic staff, 8 research fellows and nearly 20 PhDs, that's a wonderful critical mass of people, because we know in these sort of research areas, it's the people that are the resource, that are the generators of ideas and that are turning those ideas into concrete research outcomes and impact. So we're going to hear more about John's projects, but my notes here say that the focus is on a better understanding of how human aspects impact software engineering. What difference of age, culture, gender, language, socioeconomic status, human idiosyncrasies, personalities, emotions, etc. How do they manifest both in software engineering teams and make impact on that software development process, and also in respect to the end users of software, because of course it's creating software for those end users to advance whatever they want to do in their endeavours. And if we've learnt anything else in COVID in the last 2 years, we've seen that digital infrastructure and software in particular provides that technical platform that allows everyone to do things remotely, asynchronously, collaboratively, and often more creatively and innovatively if those platforms and software are right. Now, we also know how many of us have, banged our heads against our laptops or whatever, frustrated at the bugs or the weird interface we've been given. So we know that ordinary or poor software really impacts on people and their experience and how they'll use their devices and things. So John and his group are really at that forefront of not just, the people doing the cool interfaces, but making sure that it's aligned with the needs of those people and taking into account those human aspects I mentioned. So really about very practical. Software engineering is an engineering discipline, and it's very practical, and it's about engineering better software for real people, real diverse people. So they're my introductory remarks. It's wonderful to be here today. I'm just going to MC and do all the introductions. So now I will hand over to Mike Ryan, who's the Pro Vice Chancellor Research, who'll speak on behalf of Monash about John's work and the launch and so on. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks so much, Anne. It's really lovely to be here on behalf of Monash University, and welcome all of you here today. It's really an honour on behalf of the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Margaret Gardner, to welcome you here to the launch of Humanize, the Human-centric Software Engineering Laboratory. I first want to acknowledge our distinguished guests joining us today. We've got Dr. Robert Munn on behalf of the ARC, Australian Research Council, and I'm assuming Robert is going to be here, at least online. Great. And I'd like to thank Robert for being here and thank him for his ongoing support of and the ARC support, with which much of this work would not be possible. And to my Monash colleagues, particularly Professor John Grundy, Director of the Humanized Lab. Welcome, John, and welcome to all of my Monash colleagues who are here today. And a special welcome to our partners from industry who are joining us today. The success of this work is only possible if we work closely with industry at every stage of the process. We want our work to come to life and to be implemented at scale. We want to make sure that the graduates this centre produces are well placed to be future leaders in the field. And we know this is only possible through the close collaboration with industry at every step of the way. And I understand that the lab is working with over a dozen industry partners in the health, finance, government and community service domains And I believe the lab is always looking for more partners. And if anyone knows of any extra partners, please let John know. So thank you all to our partners for joining us today. You're absolutely critical to the success of this lab and the long-term success of the graduates. So thank you again for all of you here joining us today for this important event to launch the Humanized Lab. It's an important day for John and his team at Humanized Lab, but it's also an important day here for us at Monash. The way this lab is set up, as Anne described, is to collaborate, to break down its traditional barriers, having the diverse teams and to co-design with partners for social good. It's a great example of the path we want our researchers to take. It's extremely admirable. And here at Monash, we want to focus on the impacts our research can have. We don't want just the traditional lines of research, which is publishing, getting grant income and the like. We understand the success of that and the way it's been done. But we also want to lift our eyes to the horizon to see what our research can achieve and the impact it has to the world beyond the laboratory. And we want to make sure and to ensure the graduates here in the centre produces really well-placed future leaders in the field. And we know this is only possible with close collaboration with the industry partners we have as well, so it's really fantastic. So the industry partners we have, I understand, is in health, finance, government, community service domain, and so this is really fantastic. Now, I wanted to stretch to talking around our Impact 2030 strategy. And this is a strategy that Professor Margaret Gardner, our Vice-Chancellor, has put forward. The strategy outlines Monash's goals and priorities for the next 10 years and how its partnership with governments, industry and communities, our research and our education can address the challenges of our age. And as part of Impact 2030, we've identified 3 grand challenges around which we can focus our research efforts and resources. These are climate change, geopolitical security, and thriving communities. The challenges have been chosen because they're significant for all of us and global in their scale and the implications that they can achieve. And we know none of these global challenges can be solved by any one research project or any one discipline. The solution can only come from collaboration and from partners working across disciplines outside our traditional silos. We need to open up to conduct our research focused on the challenge and the impact our research can have in addressing it. It means we must also look for our new partners, for our new funders, and for new collaborators. Anyone who can actually multiply the impact that our research is achieving at the moment. And I think the Humanized Lab, as we understand it, is really designed to live these values of collaboration and impact and that have guided Monash's new Impact 2030 strategy. The vision of this lab is to create software with people at the core. The lab sits at the forefront of human-centered software engineering worldwide through collaborations with leading international teams in Asia, Europe, and the Americas. And the research projects from this lab seek to use software to answer critical questions from which we can create a better world. The questions that are being asked are bold in scope and ambition. They require software developers to work with a range of experts from a range of disciplines. And perhaps most importantly, all the projects help shift our perception of who an expert is and whose voice needs to be heard. These voices could come from local community, members of the community, patients, clinicians, but this work positions their perspective as being central to the solution. And standing here today, it's difficult to predict precisely what the impact this lab will be, but we really know it's going to be huge across a range of sectors and make people's lives better in ways we perhaps can't foresee. And finally, having talked about the research this lab will be doing and the impact it will have, I just want to touch briefly on the people actually doing the research. And we know that diversity in STEM is a challenge we need to address. And yesterday was International Women's Day, and a range of events were held across Monash campuses and across the world. Attendees were asked to imagine a gender-equal world and what we can do in our world and daily lives to break the bias, the theme of International Women's Day this year. We know that the lack of diversity in software development has helped create some of the problems this lab seeks to solve, and a lack of diversity in teams developing software can mean that software does not work equally for everyone. It may not be designed to allow for diversity of gender, race or cultural background, and it may not be fit for may not be fit for purpose for the people for whom it's intended, because their voices were not heard loud enough during the development process. So I really want to congratulate John and his colleagues on assembling such a diverse team to do such important work. It's a majority female research team, as I understand, in a traditionally male-dominated field. And we have researchers at different stages of their careers from all over the world, from Indonesia, Pakistan, Nigeria, Germany, China, Bangladesh, New Zealand, Sri Lanka, Egypt, the list goes on. And we have researchers from different disciplines beyond software development, such as women's health, engineering, and data science. So it's wonderful to see the lab is intended to improve diversity in software, that such a diverse team has been assembled here. And I really wish you every success in this important work, knowing the impact of this research can make a difference to people's lives in communities worldwide. So to finish off, thank you again for taking the time to be here today. You're all part of this lab's journey, and in time will be part of its ongoing success. The lab embodies the spirit of Monash in its collaboration, its bold innovation, its mission to use innovation and technology to create a better world. We're really proud of the team and the work already done, and we're going to be very proud of the work that's going to be conducted and the impact it will have in the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Mike. Okay, so now we have to hand over to, I'd like to introduce Dr. Robert Mun, who's the Executive Director of the ARC, who of course the funding body of John's Laureate, and hand over to John to speak, and hopefully it'll all be seamless.
Thanks, Anjit. Okay, thank you everyone, and thank you Professor Nicholson, and good afternoon everyone. I'd also like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the country throughout Australia and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present here today. I'd also like to acknowledge the distinguished guests here with us. I'm pleased to be speaking to you on behalf of the ARC's Acting CEO, Judy Zelke, for the launch of the Monash University Human-centric Software Engineering Laboratory, which has the catchy acronym of Humanize. I've known Professor Grundy for some years now, and I have gained a deep respect for his generosity of time and willingness to go out of his way to help others. His research leadership is always focused on the whole system, not just on the area of immediate challenge. And I've always viewed his capability and capacity as multidisciplinary systems engineering. The Humanized Laboratory is the result of the inspiration and leadership of Professor John Grundy, and will form a key part of the legacy of his ARC Laureate Award. Professor Grundy has an illustrious career, which would take too long to recount, but a key area I've always sought his advice and assessments for is in software engineering, and the how and why software is created. Much of the focus of the computer revolution has been on producing devices to achieve outcomes. And like my own discipline of chemical engineering, the attention of most is on achieving the outcome as efficiently as possible, often leading to unintended consequences or not being able to deliver to the outlier. Professor Grundy was awarded a laureate in recognition of his drive to ensure that the end user, the humans, in all their variety and diversity, not just the chosen archetype, were considered in all facets of the development of software. His peers have recognised his leadership and achievements to date in the field of software engineering and identified him as the person to embed change in the way education, project development and research is performed. To achieve this, Professor Grundy has brought together industry and academia to create the Humanized Lab, a place where software is designed and built primarily to meet human needs while solving real problems. The forging of linkages between Australian industry and Australian university researchers is a key part of the government's plan to ensure our economy benefits from our world-class research. And the objectives of the ARC's Australian Laureate Fellowships scheme are to support groundbreaking, internationally competitive basic and applied research, forge strong links among researchers, the international community, and/or industry and other research end users, to enhance the scale and focus of research in Australian government priority areas, to attract and retain outstanding researchers and research leaders of international reputation, and to provide an excellent research training environment and exemplary mentorship in this approach, with the support of collaborative research activity between Australian higher education sector and industry. Meeting these goals of the scheme is at the core of the Humanized Laboratory. This laboratory has been established to foster close partnerships between university-based researchers and research end users to provide innovative, high-degree research and postdoctoral training that is vital to Australia's future in making a difference. The world increasingly needs better software solutions and delivered in a more timely fashion, and meeting the needs of people, teams, industry, and society, not just the needs of the developer. The ongoing pandemic is a recent example of the need for taking into account of the full diversity of users prior to deployment of a capability. Australia has a very diverse population: age, gender, cultural background, language background, technical proficiency, socioeconomic status, personality, educational attainment. The list goes on forever. Much of the current software that we use fails to take into account this diversity, and this leads to difficulty in using it. For example, Australians with sight or mobility challenges, Australians with health challenges, supporting the huge diverse languages. Common examples again from the last 2 years of misinformation there. The culture of the Australians, supporting the vulnerable Australians, especially those with lower educational attainment or socioeconomic status, assuming everyone has a smartphone, for example. Supporting and building on the inherent and human differences of all Australians. Companies, indeed all software development companies, need ways to develop better software more efficiently and respond much more quickly to the customer needs. And this applies not just to software companies, but to all industries, government services, education, and health, who set the requirements. They need to incorporate more human-centric approaches. The Humanized Lab is an example of government, industry, and university co-supporting building world-leading research capabilities to address these needs. The laboratory will ensure that Australia catches and leads this new way of software engineering. The Centre's core vision is to provide a highly skilled, entrepreneurial, industry-ready workforce with outstanding entrepreneurship and leadership qualities. This will be achieved through the many links the Centre has made between academic and commercial partners, which will boost the generation of new intellectual property and expand the economic investment into Australian software engineering. The breadth of the training undertaken by the Centre's graduates will provide future flexible integration into both Australian and international industries and advance Australia's software engineering reputation. The extent of the broad and lasting support to Humanize is evidenced by funding from a range of initiatives, primarily by five grants from the Australian Research Council, but also contributions from projects funded by the National Health and Medical Research Council, the Department of Health, and various industry contracts. Researchers at Humanize will provide leadership and innovation in the application of software engineering now and into the future, working with top international research teams to leverage emerging international research and at the same time disseminating Australian and world-leading research and innovations. This is a fantastic opportunity for researchers and industry to participate in world-leading software engineering research and development, benefiting from the years of experience and leadership that Professor Grundy brings. And it is an opportunity for industry partners as well to gain a substantive competitive edge from the research expertise that they are engaging with within their organisations. I congratulate Professor John Grundy for your work in assembling and establishing such an important laboratory with such talented and engaged partners to drive forward your program. The success of this centre will be driven by the diverse expertise of your investigators and partners, and the latter of which encompasses both health, education, government and community services, and finance. All technology users who are often criticised for their software delivery not encompassing the needs of all their users. The ARC is confident this laboratory will boost Australia's software engineering capability and capacity and lead the development of robust user-focused technology. So, to conclude, I wish you every success with today's launch and looking forward to seeing the new outcomes, especially changes in how software is planned and delivered, which will result from your extensive collaboration. Thank you. And back.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mun. That was great to hear from the ARC's perspective about the reasons why John has been awarded his laureate and the things that they're expecting from it. So now it's my pleasure to introduce John. You've already heard a few things. I would want to say, though, that, you know, John, we're so fortunate to have him at Monash. He's a fantastic contributor and colleague. He's very generous with his time. He, apart from leading all this amazing research and lab, he's, you know, willingly joins, or he says he's willing, no, he willingly joins committees, contributes his great experience and ideas. He mentors junior colleagues as well as his students, of course, and he is always happy to pitch in and make that broader contribution. So we're really fortunate to have him at Monash. It's wonderful that his body of work to date has been recognised by receiving the laureate. And it's great that we've now got this opportunity to have John with us leading the lab and fulfilling his Laureate Fellowship to achieve all these great things. So a very, very great pleasure to introduce Professor John Grundy.
Thanks so much, Anne. Colleagues, students, friends, great to have you all here today. Thank you very much for coming, particularly in these pandemic worrying times. So yeah, again, I really appreciate your attendance today. Now let's see if the clicker works. So I'll do the virtual acknowledgement of country, given some of us are here in person and some online. So together for this meeting, physically dispersed, virtually constructed. Let's take a moment to reflect on the meaning of place. Doing so, recognise the various traditional lands on which we're doing our business today. We and I acknowledge the elders, past, present and emerging. Oh, thanks very much, makes it a little easier. Of the land we work in, with gratitude and respect. I acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nations, the traditional owners of the land which I'm meeting with you today. Again, I also acknowledge the sovereignty of the land was never ceded. I also like to particularly acknowledge anyone from the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities meeting with us today and pay my particular respects to you. Now, we've heard a bit about me, but it's actually a team game as research. So these are the lab staff members. We also have a lot of collaborators from the wider software engineering group. Some here today, I think I see Li, Chun Yang, Aldaira, Kla, and others, and a few from other universities we're working with, Mohammed and Nathan, Fei, and so on. So while these are kind of the lab members, we've got a lot of other collaborators we work closely with as well. We have a large number of students. There's only some of them that I happen to have photos of. Again, many of them here with us today, a couple online. And again, the research would not be possible without their terrific abilities, skills and endeavours. And we have a few alumni. I just want to acknowledge these. So again, the lab's been going a little while and had planned this launch just a little while ago. But in that time, we've been fortunate to have colleagues move on to, dare I say, greater and better things in other organisations, and even a couple starting which is really, really great. I wanted to show you this. This is our kind of mission, vision, etc. statement. Wasn't my idea to create the lab. The idea was actually Professor John Whittle's when he was my boss. I just got the Laureate Fellowship and John says, hey John, Laureate Fellows need a lab, you need a lab. We're going to create one. So great, thanks very much. I also want to acknowledge Anne's support. She was the Deputy Dean Research and committed a lot of faculty resources to establishment of the lab, support for my Laureate Fellowship and support for many other research endeavours that we do. So this wouldn't be possible without their strategic support as well. I just want to point out a couple of things here. Invent new approaches for building software encompassing diversity. So Robert and Mike particularly talked about a number of the real problems. I'll highlight a few more in a moment with current software. And that's really dear to us. We're trying to come up with better ways to build software that encompasses the diverse nature that humankind is, instead of a one-size-fits-all model. Break the digital divide, useful and inclusive software. I really worry that so much of society is dependent on IT solutions these days for virtually everything we do. We're leaving more and more people behind in that process, and we need to do something about it, and that's kind of one of the real key drivers of this lab. So many of these you might be familiar with. So gender bias. So one of the ones that shocks me is seatbelts. Seatbelts are designed for average-sized males, because that's what all the crash test dummies are. So if you're not an average-sized male, which many people aren't, then you're in a bit of trouble. 17% or something more likely to die or be injured in a car. This is just ridiculous. Health apps that don't support tracking a menstrual cycle because they're all bought by men. So kind of things, how do these things happen? Ethnic bias, if you're not a Northern European male, then your face recognition stuff doesn't work properly and so on. You have software that uses completely inappropriate words and language and images and so on for your cultural background. Jargon, we IT people never use jargon, never use acronyms. These never manifest themselves on the interfaces and so on we provide people. Age bias, we've been studying that in a project I'll highlight in a moment, which is really quite worrying as well. And many people live with various physical and mental challenges. Some they're born with, some they acquire through various reasons as they go through their life journey. And again, most software developers don't have any lived experience of these things, don't think about them, don't incorporate them in their solutions that they're building. And there are many others as well. So what I want to do is just give you a few examples of the projects that are going on. I hope I've selected a reasonably good sampling of these. Some of them, again, are done with wider collaborations with some of the people here and some others, and some particular PhD projects. Some are projects driven by some of the lab members. This one's one that Tangela and Jen's been leading. There's two here. There's look at job bias, so that gender bias in job ads. So Tangela's developed a really interesting way of both detecting bias in IT job ads in particular, and a set of guidelines and ways to fix that. Turns out in a recent study we did, there's actually very severe systemic gender bias in IT job ads, which we postulate leads to lots of issues with underrepresentation and failure to advance in careers. Another project that Jen and Tangela have been working on is age bias. So looking at analysing e-commerce sites, and they're all oriented towards young people buying things. Now, one of the reasons this might be is because the developers of these tend to be relatively young people. There may be other reasons as well, of course. And they've developed some, again, guidelines and ways to tackle that. With Humphrey, Jen and Tangela, we've been working on, and a couple of PhD students, ways of enriched personas to inform developers about the frustrations, the goals, the challenges, and the demographic background of people. This particular project was done to help develop a better smart parking solution. If you've used the smart parking, which many of you might have today to come here, you'll realise the Cello Park's got a lot of problems in terms of the way you interact with it. If you tried to register your credit card, by the way, you'll know what I'm talking about. This particular one that was developed by a student team working with us on a Monash City Council Smart Cities project actually provides several different ways to book your park and grab your park based on the variety of different personas that the team identified. Humphrey, Wakar and Mujtaba, among others, have been, several of our PhDs and John Whittle himself, working on a wide range of human values projects in software engineering. So how do our software support the human values that we have? Or as one of John's articles says, is your software valueless? So one of the projects they did is analyse a large number of app reviews and find out a number of human values that we call being violated or not met by those by those software solutions that make them again highly problematic and essentially either not used or problematic to use by a wide user base. Work Ingo and Rashina and a couple of our PhDs are doing around how do human aspects affect software development. In this case, this is a PhD student's analysis of work done to look at the different kinds of aspects of humans that have been studied in software teams. And you'll see there's kind of a lot of gaps there. So a lot of things that make us human, we just don't understand how those affect the engineering of complex software systems. And again, we postulate they have a really important impact, and we need to study this. We have a number of projects looking at different human aspects and how they influence the engineering of software systems. This is a project of Rashina's and one of our PhD students and a software team, an honours team, looking at capturing emotions as you handle requirements during software engineering. And so there's an analysis here of some different emotions this developer has felt as they've developed some complex software, and we're using that, or the manager's using that to identify pain points in the team. Now, again, that's become even more critical when we've been doing so much remote development over the last couple of years. And people in the community in general, but software developers have had lots of serious mental health challenges in managing their work. Work by Huria Ringo and some students. This particular one is modelling age of users and different solutions we might want for differently aged users to support their particular preferences and problem-solving styles. And again, they both have PhDs, recently started PhDs, looking at how to take these kind of human aspect enhanced models and generate software with what we call adaptive interfaces, so that the interface is tailored towards the different needs and characteristics of different users. You might end up with one app, but it's 5 different interfaces for 5 different, again, problem-solving styles, for example. Project that Anu is overseen, again, with an honours project team. This is actually the campus retail centre, if you, those of you familiar Monashites. This is an accessible version that's got a bunch of highlights to help someone who's got a mobility challenge, a sight challenge, or some other challenge in terms of navigating a complex floor plan space to get around in this. Here's another example that another team with Anu and I built, is a adaptive website. So this is a set of characteristics of dyslexia, sight challenges, colour blindness, etc., and various preferences. And we can do things like come up with a more friendly app for someone, say, with a dyslexic challenge or or a colour blindness challenge. Everyone needs an accessible site. Here's an example. This one's actually led by Li and developed by Zhao Chen, and now an extension of that, Rashina's leading a digital health project on. This is an example of an enhanced telehealth system to, again, help a variety of diverse users, maybe diverse in language, proficiency as well as spoken language, understanding of medical concepts, etc., to get a better telehealth experience. We've got a number of other e-health projects, many of them Jen's leading, looking at, again, enhancing support for various areas of women's health and chronic disease management and so on. And lastly, here's an example that, again, Anu and Huria and I and some students have worked on. All software's got problems, got defects, is not perfect. And one of the problems is that reporting those defects for diverse users is difficult for them because the reporting software is not accessible, is not suitable for diverse users. So we've got examples of where we can do a voice recording of your bugs or your app reviews. We've got ones where we can expand the size of that. We can use a more dyslexic-friendly text. We can use a a dark mode to help with, again, site challenges and so on. So this is what I call human-centric defect reporting, human-centric feeding back to the developers problems I'm having with software. I just want to finish, well, almost finish, by thanking our many funders. So again, the primary funding for the lab is from the Australian Research Council, and thank them very much for their support over many years, but also from contributions from the MRFF, from NHMRC, a large Smart Cities grant, a digital health grant, and so on. And then many industry partners who collaborate on projects. Some of those provide funding in cash, some of them provide funding and in kind, access to data, access to customers, challenging ideas to work with them on. And again, we just wouldn't be able to do the work that we do, but also translate that work that we do into practice, which is our ultimate goal. So lastly, we would like to collaborate with more software teams. We'd like to collaborate with more software researchers. So if you have projects that need a human lens, dare I say, have some pretty interesting and pretty challenging developer characteristics, end user characteristics, domain characteristics. Again, we'd like to invite you to contact us. We can study challenging end user needs with you. We can do R&D with your teams. We'd love to place students. We've got PhDs, masters, honours students, undergraduate students. The faculty has a large internship IBL program. We're always looking for places for those students to get real-world experience, but also to bring the latest in terms of their educational and technological skills to bear in the workplace. Once again, thank you very much for attending today and again, eventually launching the lab. Again, I thank all my colleagues and students in particular for your many collaborations over the years. Again, research is a team sport, and the work wouldn't have been able to be done without you all, your enthusiasm, interest and expertise, and I thank you so much for that. Thank you.
The last segment of society, so I decided to change it. Fundamentally, software is developed to solve human problems, so supporting health, transport, education, running businesses, leisure, and so on. However, current software development techniques forget about the different humans that make use of the software. The end users have a very wide range of differences, so they have different personalities, different kind of emotional reactions to the software system, different ages, different genders, different cultural backgrounds, which can influence quite greatly their expectations of the services and systems that are supporting them. How do we enable them to fully participate in a society that's heavily software driven, software dependent? How do we provide them interfaces to those software solutions that enable them to do the things they need to do? The teams developing software generally lack diversity, if you like, in that range of kind of issues. For many, many years, we've had a severe underrepresentation of women. It's also got ageist issues to some degree as well. What we need to do is, throughout the software development life cycle, incorporate these understandings and to treat as a first-class object, if you like, these diverse human characteristics. Software developers ultimately need to realize these important things. So we have a software engineering degree here at Monash, and we have computer science and IT degrees, and we have to educate future practitioners to understand these are important issues. You should think about them and care about them in order to better support society going forward. I didn't like the way
Okay, bit of an action man tone there, John. Excellent. All right, so we're nearly at the end of the formal proceedings. then we're about to go into a Q&A. So from what you've heard, what you're interested in, start thinking of some questions for John. But just before we do that, there's the official, no longer do we bang a bottle and break it over the bow of the ship, but we're launching the lab, and we have a certificate of opening presentation, which Professor Ryan is going to be handing over to John. So the lab is launched. Thanks, everyone. Someone take some photos? Okay, so I think, I think you get the mic, John, and you can take the questions from the floor yourself. Don't need me to moderate that one. You're all good? Yeah.
Yep, someone's got a microphone.
Oh.
Someone asked me a
Oh,
difficult
you're
question.
roving mic. Okay, even better. So.
I have a question to start off, because it's really fantastic what you're doing, and some of the projects here are really remarkable. But how do you identify the projects that you want to go on and study? Because there must be so many options and opportunities there. How do you realise what opportunities there are and realise the need that's there?
It's a good question. Look, so technically any software theoretically has some human aspects, greater or more or less. Personally, I like ones that I actually haven't worked on before, so usually people tend to gravitate to things where they've got lots of experience and so on. I actually like, there's something about being a software engineer, being an IT person. You get to work in all these different domains that you weren't trained in. So I've worked in myself in lots of health systems, finance systems for a long time, manufacturing, in kind of community service type things, government, etc. And I wasn't trained in any of those, but I had to learn a lot about, when I was working on accounting systems, I had to learn a lot about accounting. I'm glad I don't work on those anymore, particularly. There are no accountants in the audience, I hope. But again, it really stretches you, you gather new horizons. So I personally like, a company or an organisation that's got a problem that I haven't worked on before. I'll learn a lot about that organisation, that group of people, their end users, etc. And I find that makes me grow. I'm kind of fundamentally a nosy person, so I get to find out all these interesting new details. Again, some of the team have worked, again, and especially Jen's worked for a long time in digital health solutions, again, particularly for women's health. So anything that comes out of the domain, sort of, she'll tend to be the driver and the leader. Haria's worked in data, and Humphrey have worked in data science. Anu's worked in, again, accessible computing for quite some time. So we've got, again, people who have particular, perhaps specialist areas. And if a project comes up that fits them, that tends to be the fit. But I personally like working on it. Hello?
Thanks heaps for what you said. I really enjoyed it. I've struggled with the trend where businesses expect their users to adapt to what they offer them. In what sense is your lab going to be encouraging those businesses to almost shift the balance of power back to the user, both from the data perspective, but also in how I interact with a business's systems?
Excellent question. So I'll tell you a little story now about a company I work with in New Zealand, building business process automation software. And we got a big grant from the government and made a bit of a splash. And so the CEO got invited to go on the Prime Minister's trip to India. And this was Helen Clark, was the Prime Minister. And she said, I'm going to get John, there's another John, to tell you about what we're doing in R&D in this business process automation space. And it was to 2,000 Indian software engineers. And so he got up and said, my company is trying to make software engineers redundant. And there was a stunned silence in the audience. But actually, that's a good example of the kind of project. Again, I've done a number of ones in that domain where there's something wrong about one size fits all. Kind of inherently you know this, but the kind of cost pressures and complexity pressures and getting access to diverse people pressures and team members having enough depth of knowledge to do it all kind of work against you in some way. But I do like the idea of end users being able to change things. I gave you one little example of me being able to say I've got this challenge, make the interface more suitable for me. That kind of, we call adaptive kind of interface. But I think that could be much broader as well, where you might change the workflow, you might even change the whole goals, if you like, of what you're trying to achieve with the software to better suit that individual's context of use, their demographics, their background, their expertise, etc. Now, it's not easy. It's a lot more difficult doing that than one-size-fits-all software development, but you know, we've seen lots of examples of the problems with one-size-fits-all. So I like that trend. We've got the no-code development trend or the end-user development trend where can we cut the software engineer out, if you like, or the IT person out. That only works so far because building software is a really, really, really complex, challenging domain. So like engineering and things like this, you need experts. But yeah, can we give those stakeholders, end users, more control over that? And I think part of that might be the software itself, but of course through the development life cycle, can we engage more deeply with them through appropriate mechanisms to make sure what we end up with is a better fit. Anne's got a question. A difficult one, I hope. A difficult question, I hope.
Start. Yeah. All right. Someone else got to ask one more question at least after this, so start thinking. So that idea of tailoring and possibly, you know, adapting the software to meet a broader sort of range of diverse people, it does sound really good. I want to be a little bit provocative though, and we know that there's a big awareness now that in data science and AI that when you have elements of the data and possibly, you know, looking at how you recognise men versus women and so on, that if you've got biased data or data that actually captures probably existing stereotypes, that you can be building that into your next lot of systems. And so even though we want to recognise diversity in users, we don't want it necessarily to be perpetuating stereotypes that might be better than a one user model, but are not necessarily going to adapt to the full diversity. So how do you deal with that?
Look, a really good one, and some of the expertise in that area, people like, you know, Clara and John, Wakar and so on, looking at the sort of software engineering for AI, software engineering for ethical AI. What are the whole different ways we should conceptualise going about developing such systems? I think we need a fundamental rethink. And again, those human values, what's really important to us, and there's obviously going to be perhaps clashes and so on. The way we've been developing software in some of these areas is obviously wrong, and we need to completely rethink it. And how do you de-bias the data set? What does bias even mean? Is some bias actually acceptable in some situations where it gives you some advantages for certain things? But again, there's just so many examples of... I always think another good thing there is just because we can build it, should we build it? There's kind of a lot of software systems that you kind of see creeping into the world, feels a bit Orwellian, and they sometimes have good drivers, you know, safety of people and so on, but they run terrible risks of, you know, all manner of biased outcomes against particular segments of the population. And I think we as technologists, not just software engineers, but engineers, technologists in general, need to always have that kind of, you know, critic and conscience of society hat on as well. Should we be building this? Is it being done? We just had a question about, you know, I think the one that worries me, again, cost pressures or delivery pressures mean, well, yeah, it'd be great to do it for those people, but we haven't got time for it, so tough luck to them. You know, is that not acceptable in a modern society where, you know, I can't remember who loosely quoting, you know, society is defined by how well it looks after the most disadvantaged or the most vulnerable. I think we've done I don't think we've done as good a job by any means as we could in Australian society in that regard. So again, I think it's a rethink from all the way at the top, but down the bottom, those of us who are developing software solutions, you're asking some hard questions. Yeah, and some of the testing that hasn't been undertaken with some of these examples, it's just shocking that we can release things that have obviously got severe problems, and no one seems to have thought of it. Why is that? So I think there's a rethink from the top and bottom that's necessary, and including your own domain and AI and so on, where, you know, we've just had so many debacles. It's just not acceptable to keep doing that.
Just a comment, but obviously software engineering's really only been around for 50 or 60 years as an engineering domain, whereas people have been building buildings and bridges and formalising that engineering process for a long time. And we also know that, you need to be an accredited engineer to sign off on a building like this, but that's not yet true of the equivalent software system. So we have a way to go in our discipline. You can, excellent. So can someone else put up their hand? But we'll let John answer that question while we transfer the mic. Okay.
So I have been doing accreditation for Engineers Australia of software engineering program. I'm a strong believer that software engineering should be an accredited engineering program, and there are a lot of good things that come from engineering. By the way, IT's got its own professional ethic, and we should be adhering to those as well. Again, we've got either EA accreditation, ACS accreditation, or both for all our programs at Monash, as we should. And we should be incorporating that in the teaching and in the projects that we give our students. Students shouldn't be put on placements in organisations where they might, for example, we know they're going to be building dodgy systems or going through dodgy processes. So we should be doing some careful QA of that and so on. So I think, again, when I joined the software industry in the 80s, I worked with people who didn't have degrees that taught themselves. Some of them were great developers, by the way, but some of them were shockingly bad. And some of the people who were turning out of university in those days, again, didn't have any kind of ethical conscience or anything, and a few of them went on to prove that, unfortunately. But I think we need to be setting that bar high. If you're building technologies, you should be doing it at a very high ethical standard all the way through.
Hey, John, a really great talk and exciting research. Just wondering, because you're talking about the personalization of software, so is there any danger or risk on ultra-personalization? How do you find the balance?
So what for?
Ultra-personalized software.
So over-personalised? Probably. So I'm not sure if it's one I've thought too much about, but there probably is a danger. There's another danger, I just talked briefly about tailoring your own software. So I've done a lot of work in that area from time to time, and more recently, as a couple of those examples showed, with particularly accessibility solutions, where the person themselves might have preferences because it makes it easier to use, and we should support that. But there are some dangers. You can switch off the filters, or what Anne was talking about. You could switch off the things that show you the alerts. I was talking to a hospital person where this is a senior professor and head of a large hospital unit. Said, right, first thing I do when I log on to Epic or Cerner, whatever the one they use, I switch off all the alerts because there's so many of them, they overwhelm me. And so there might be one in there of that 50. This patient's got a serious thing, and you should look at that alert. But there's a danger that I switch off all these things, or I uncheck these boxes, or do whatever. It's now personalised to me, and it's got to optimise my workflow and so on. But one of the things that software is really good at, or technology is good at, large data set sifting, proactive kind of stuff based on filters and patterns. I've now just turned that off, and it might be a consequence. The other classic ones in aircraft, I'll flick that warning sound off in the aircraft. Most of the time it's okay, but occasionally we'll fly into a mountain or do some other, terrible failure. So again, I work with Tullers on a linkage project, interesting, air traffic control, and work with a guy who'd been an air traffic controller for 20 years, guiding aircraft into Australia. And some of the stories they had of the software is very complex, and it needs to give you a lot of help, but it's a very fatiguing and overwhelming kind of domain. There's a real balance, and there's a very limited tailoring of that to the individual, because you can't risk the individual, again, putting it into a mode that's actually going to over-personalise and end up with one of those catastrophic failures. So I think there is a danger there. And again, should the software be giving you some help about what's sensible to do and not sensible to do, and so on, is again another interesting insight.
Hey, John. Thanks for your talk today. Really interesting. So just to reflect a little bit, and maybe there is a question in it or something you'd like to speak to, we're kind of moving from a time now, I guess, where software is created and people really have to learn how to use the software, and there's quite a bit of training around how to use software. So with your lab, are you moving towards a future where more time is spent, perhaps in balance, on learning about people, and then with that knowledge, software is able to be developed so it learns how to adapt to people?
Absolutely, great insight, and I think that is an important direction. As we have more useful AI these days, there's a thought that, there can be some sort of feedback loop, human in the loop, software kind of auto-adapting, and so on. We've got a couple of little simple examples of those that we've been working on as well. But again, that one I talked about, trying to understand developers more, stakeholders, not just end users, but the other people involved in like paying for a software system or commissioning a software system, or impacted by that software system even if they don't directly use it, we think is really critical. And software engineers don't seem to have a great understanding of many of those things in many domains. So even how their own software teams work, there's been very limited studies of the human dynamics in that, and sometimes that ends up with some of these kind of problematic outcomes and so on. So I think learning about the teams, learning about the users, the stakeholders, learning how those things fit together is really super interesting. And then I think the way we conceptualize developers and users and software is actually fundamentally wrong. This is the big picture. So the them and us attitude. So most of us in this audience are probably us. We're software developers or IT people. Everyone else is a them. And that's actually when I was trained and when I practiced, and probably when I research, it's still a very dominant thing. There's us, the IT people. Sometimes it's the engineers. We broaden it a little bit. Sometimes not. And then there's everyone else. And I think that's highly problematic because it brings a lot of these problems along the way at every point of the way of the process. And we need a more, the last little picture I had was a living lab thing where you have, it's called a co-creation space where everyone's an equal, everyone's voice is equal, everyone's treated as an equal, and everyone has equal validity in terms of their contribution, and no matter what part of that spectrum you're on. And I think that way of thinking, I visited a living lab in Copenhagen. In fact, Neela and I were on that visit. And it was really interesting seeing how, those people with cardiac challenges, the various kinds of clinical people, the software people, the device people, and so on, all work together to kind of come up and co-create the solution as a team of equals and all with different backgrounds and strengths. And I think that's where we need to move our thinking. But we still train, unfortunately, IT people as IT people in the rest of the world. And so I think that we need to do something about that. And that will flow with some of those benefits that I think you touched on.
Okay, so we are now out of time. I'd like to thank everyone again for joining us for this launch, for this celebration of John, his lab and his laureate. And we now have, I believe, networking and drinks, which are upstairs, up that way. So I hope many of you are able to stay on and mingle and have a chat and also speak to John. So thanks for coming, and once again, let's congratulate John. Mingle.